Luke doesn't write to tell them what happened, but to explain to them what difference it's supposed to make in their life. Luke writes this morning's passage to address two issues that were facing Christians in the 40 or 50 years after Jesus had lived and died and rose again. First, there was the question of how to respond to the inevitable fact that some people would reject the message that they had to share. And second, there was the question of what sort of commitment was required of these Christians if they were to be faithful witnesses to the kingdom, to the new day that springs forth from Jesus. Now, no doubt that there's some hyperbole in Jesus' answer to this question when he speaks to his would-be followers. But no doubt, Jesus is speaking of a very serious commitment. Burying one's own father was an extremely important obligation in Jewish culture. And that business about going home to say goodbye and no one who turns back after putting their hand to the plow, well, that's an explicit reference to Elijah and Elisha. When the prophet Elijah first calls Elisha to be his successor, Elisha is plowing in the field, and Elijah gives him permission to go home and tell his family goodbye. So Jesus is saying in Luke's Gospel that his followers must have a commitment greater than that of the prophet Elisha. Now, I often hear people adamantly insisting that America is a Christian nation. But I'm not all that sure just what this American Christianity has to do with following Jesus. Very often it seems to me that it is filled with just the sort of compromises with culture that Jesus condemns in the words we heard this morning. Just the sort of compromises that so confuse our alien visitor. A little while ago, a few days ago really, I stumbled across a sermon of Martin Luther King's. Sermon originally preached in his church in Atlanta, but that was later rebroadcast on radio on Christmas Eve, 1967. And in this sermon, he addresses his opponents, both those opponents who use threats and violence against him, and those more mainstream opponents who think him impatient, misguided, impractical, idealistic, a striver for some pious utopia. And he said, "We shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We will meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we will still love you. We cannot, in all good conscience, obey your unjust laws and abide by the unjust system, because non-cooperation with evil is just as moral an obligation as is cooperation with good. And so throw us in jail, and we will still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, and as difficult as it is, we will still love you. Send your propaganda agents around the country and make it appear that we are not fit, culturally or otherwise, for integration. And we'll still love you. But be assured, we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. And one day we'll win our freedom. We will not only win freedom for ourselves, we will so appeal to your heart and conscience that we will win you in the process. And our victory will be a double victory. This seems to me precisely the sort of commitment that Jesus demanded of his followers, and the sort of commitment that might have impressed an alien visitor. And if I and just a few others could live lives that demonstrated this sort of commitment, I seriously doubt that so many people would regard the church as a relic of another time. But I do not despair, and I am not without hope. For according to Luke, Jesus does not condemn even those who outright reject him. And what is more, with the coming of the Holy Spirit, frightened and timid disciples become bold and brave. Even Peter, who denied knowing Jesus just to save his own skin. Come, Holy Spirit, come.